where are we going to go tonight? Always a good question. So I'll start with a poem here. Patience, endurance. Sitting upright, shivers go from toes to crown of head. Oh my! Running down to the highway, thumb pointing away from here. Hitchhiking to a place where the discomfort and the darkness cannot come. Breath, one moment. Out of nowhere, the last embers of a fire gone out. Spark. Yes, the fear rises in the flames again, giving itself to the unimaginable. Remembering here, returning instantly, pure longing for freedom. Blurred and ragged as it may be, being blind and poor, we find another breath. Learn to wait. Again and again, in a place of dis-ease, waiting, only in our own sunshine. Forgiveness, our own home of belonging. Sitting back, the empty hallway beneath the breath, where everything broken returns to itself, reassembles, glued from the horse hooves of the beast of burden we are. Fingers unclench. Luminous sky opens, waiting on the rim. Time, body, breath, again and again walking across any darkness, any territory, any high pass, to find one heart, your heart, enduring, constant, glued together. Precious life, this one life, confirms our courage. We go forth. Learning to wait again and again. So last night I talked about this word, atamayata, not there with the object. And what really it's based on is the fact that everything we see here, everything we think, everything we experience could be pure. In essence, it means it's simply something arises, we notice it, and then something else arises and we notice it, and go on like that. But it's not actually what we do. In the Abhidharma Kosha, which is the version, there was one in Sri Lanka and one in China, and the one in China talks about that in one mind moment, just in an instant, that 17 factors arise in that moment. And that those 17 factors, the first one is pure perception. It means that that mind and the object are just what they are. The suchness of the object. Then the next 16 moments are called mental formations. We make up about our experience. So, you can look at this two ways. One is kind of, oh my gosh, how am I going to get around all this mental formation? I mean, that's the obvious. But the other is that in each mind moment, there is this pure perception. And that we're actually experiencing very rapidly the what's available, undistorted. And that's the kind of the kind of jewel in the garbage here. So we sit here, and a lot of times there's all this concocting going on. You're kind of telling stories, I believe. And if you're not, your habit is so strong that you'll make up one. Just to kind of fill the space. Anything but the breath. It's kind of like that, So first, just to speak a little bit about also the mental factors that have to be supportive of the effort of being with the breath is, first of all, it does take this effort that is really one of the primal factors here that we have to, again, it's not, there's different ways of looking at that word, but maybe just exertion, maybe a good enough word. Because we always think about effort as it's effort to get something. And I'm not really talking about effort to get something. I'm talking about really simply exertion. That means that there's the energetic capacity to aim. So there has to be an aiming, an energetic aiming that has to happen. Then there has to be, and that, one thing about aiming and the effort of energy, we can use it to win and lose, in the sense of the game of life, or we can use it for really what we're doing here, which has to do with, I can only say it's the purity of mind. So when we see that there are states of mind and stories and stuff, it's probably better not to go with. I'm sure you have a few of those. Better not to go with. You concoct more stuff around them, and you don't actually know what's true. But you can do all sorts of things with it. Gymnastics, mental gymnastics. But the practice here is, the effort actually is just simply, we use this kind of middle piece as mindfulness. Mindfulness is actually in its nature is pure. It has no, in its kind of purest translation, has no desire in it. So it's not wanting to be anything. It's simply the mindful of the experience. So in essence has no, where effort can be towards good or bad things. On the other side of that, we have concentration. And concentration is also necessary. It's one of these pieces that has to co-join. These three actually have to co-join together. They are really the kind of the basis or the function of all this. And that concentration has to do with simply from the effort and the mindfulness that we begin to collect ourselves. And sometimes it's collecting around a single object, which here in some ways is not, some mantra practice, visualizations is around a single object is there. This is more concentrating on moving objects, okay, which make it, what's true about it is that with the mindfulness, it actually leans towards insight, where the other actually leads to more absorptions, which are fine. But from kind of the what we're trying to gain here, in the sense that there's gaining, there's really no losing. But what we're trying to gain is actually insight, and insight into how does this work? How do we work? And so tonight, really, when I talk about not there with the object, you also have to backtrack a little, because it could easily be that you could disregard one of the fundamentals of the mindful of what's here. And that is the body. And one of the interesting things back in, this is probably about 89 or 90, I think, we had a Western teachers meeting in Dharamsala with the Dalai Lama. And I was not there that time, but one of my friends was there that described the fact that we were describing things that are true about Westerners. They're different than Tibetans. And they are a native people. They are very much grounded in their bodies. That's not something we even talk about or think about. But when you come to Western culture, one of the things that came up in the questions was, we're not in our bodies. And that was a little confounding to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He said, "You're what? You're not in your body." So it's become one of the, at least in my experience of these practices, is that for the mindfulness, and that we have the 5 senses in the mind. Or you could say mind is more than just the thought itself. But one of the things that happens is it's easy in spiritual practices to kind of use the helium balloon effect, which has to do with everything from the neck up. And that the fundamentals of this practice are really about creating a wholeness. And a wholeness means that we have to incorporate everything that we're given. And one of the fundamentals of waking up is that you have to own the body as part of the vehicle. And it's easy in kind of Western culture to we've really dismissed it more than we have integrated it. And we can see that particularly in our kind of religious heritage, where from Constantinople on, there was this split between the Desert Fathers, who were very, they probably were doing the same thing we're doing here on some level. And who knows, I'm going this summer to Ladakh, and where I'm going is the monastery 2 up from where is where they say Jesus, they have records there over 2,000 years ago that He was there. I don't know. Sounds good to me. Everybody wants to claim something, but but the thing is, these Desert Fathers, they had all these practices in pre-Constantinople, before the kind of it seems like whenever the great royalty comes in and puts a decree that we have some change which has to do with power. And one of the things, power is power over. And so I think in that whole process, somewhat what happened, and I shouldn't even be saying this since I'm not a theologian and this is outside of some of my particular knowledge, but what seemed to happen there was with that power structure was there was that awareness of body. That awareness of body was actually, I don't know if you can say lost or disregarded, because in it disregarded, in a sense, it disregarded, you could say, the feminine. in the sense of the earth in Gaia, and how do we, that we're part of the earth, how do we hold the way native cultures understand it and experience it. And what we saw was primal use, whether it was the trees or the fish or the forest or whatever it was for primal use. And that we were the beings who had the privilege of that. And in that, there was great emphasis on transcendence, to transcend, including transcend the body, is very much part of that fundamental training. And so it has a long heritage of this helium spiritual reality, because you can, in some ways, transcend this. But then you look at what the Buddha was trying to teach. And you see that, in his life experience, when he finally, after 6 years of all these trainings and concentrations, and he perfected them. And then he came in the last years, was actually to do austerities. And he began starving himself. And so he could go out, out for long, long periods of time. But he had to come back to what? To his body, to being here, to being in the marketplace. And when he would come back, he said, "Oh, I'm not free. I still have greed, I still have aversion, I still have ignorance." And so at that point, they say he was down, he was starving himself, and he was down in the river taking a bath, and he couldn't get out of the water, and almost drowned. And at that point, he goes up and sits under kind of the village tree, and really has to begin to go back to his own life, in a sense. Somewhat what we do here is there has to be a little bit of review. And in his review, he remembered when he was 8 years old and his father was doing spring planting. And he remembered that everything happens under a tree with the Buddha. So he's under a crab apple tree or something. And he, at 8 years old, goes into a spontaneous absorption. And he knew then, and then when he came out, as he was coming out of absorption, he had insight, which is really the way it works. And so he remembered that, of that time. And because he remembered that time, then he said there has to be another way. And it wasn't to transcend it. And so at that point, that story goes, which is actually, I think, a really great story. And I'm being very liberal with the story. Well, in the sense that the story is so, that's the way it's looked at. And you have Sujata, who was this young woman who had just had a baby. Now, in that culture, she was probably 14 years old. She just had, that was her first child. And she was young, she was beautiful. She was the kind of the flower of femininity. And she goes to thank the tree, the village tree where this is happening, and there's this, weird dude sitting under, who she can't tell whether he's, obviously energetically, whether, because he's almost dead, whether he's some kind of tree spirit or some angel or something, and she does not know what it is. And she then goes and offers this, it's kind of a rice pudding called kheer. It's rice, milk, coconut, rose water, yogurt. They say it's like mother's milk. And she goes and offers it to this emaciated aesthetic who is in his culture. First of all, he is not allowed, in no way a sadhu is allowed to receive anything directly from a woman in that culture of the time. No way. That was just, it had to be passed through hands. And he accepts it from her. So that's it. This is the rub. He's breaking through that. And he eats the kheer. Now, what I don't know for sure in the text, there's a story that either was once or that she kept coming back and feeding him until he got strong enough so that he actually crossed the river, and he goes down and he weaves a mat, kusha grass. He crosses across the river to where this pipal tree, the bodhi tree is, and he sits under it for what they call the 4 watches, through the night. And now that's also debatable whether it was actually 7 days or whether it was 1 night. Again, these are part of our archetypal stories. But that story of the fact that he breaks the rules, his 5 closest friends that have been with him for years, and one of them says his manservant from the palace that he had come from, they completely reject him. He has broken the rules, and they leaving him. They totally are disgusted with him, and probably gossip and do all that stuff. And he goes off, and crosses the river, and he goes and he sits under the Bodhi tree as we know it today. And it's not the same tree. It went down to Sri Lanka and came back, but that's okay. It's still there. And then he begins this process of this realization that the effort that he had created through, really, I would say, through lifetimes of determination, that he had the ability to do that. He didn't know where he was going, okay, but he had the determination, and he understood that there was something about equanimity in being present, that it wasn't to transcend, but it was actually something that was available here and now. This was his insight. And so instead of going out, he stayed. But he stayed, and it's interesting, the first watch really is this whole process where he has insight into the self, of how it comes up, and he goes back and I think it's the first watch, he reviews his past. So he actually does what would you call it? I know in my very first Vipassana retreat, I misunderstood the instructions for the first 10 days. And I chronologically went back through my life and trying to get it in order, trying to get it, so that I could sort of have a chronological view of it. And I also began to see how much I'd suffered, which I had not known, or I had not allowed myself to experience the amount of suffering I had been through in my life. That was something I just kept moving past it. So I had to turn around and do a life review. Well, he did a life review, except it went back 900 lives. Now, whatever. But it's called the Jataka Tales. It's quite, they're fascinating tales of, being an animal, being pirate, different kinds of sailors, and he was once the king of the Nagas. All kinds of kind of fascinating pieces of the review. But you all have that too. You've all been many people already in this life. We're all kind of multiple personalities, and certainly have been many different people just in this life. And so there's this capacity. He went way back. And so his insight was, though, into that, he had the insight into the nature of self. And you can see that, in a way, there was a sense of kind of hopelessness in that. He saw that. And then he began the next process of seeing that others all had stories like that. And they say then he saw into impermanence, that all of this was that people were arising and dying and arising and dying again, and it just went on and on. And again, he had this moment of realization, of insight into that. And then, and each time there was, he was creating a kind of a larger connection to the whole, no longer just to Gautama Siddhartha, but he was actually expanding. And I think in a lot of ways, once we do life review and we sit, we begin to see that not only us, but all things are going through the same process. The person next to you, everything's going on like this. And so he began to see from there the impermanence of the individual. He began to see what the word is samsara. And he started seeing the wheel of dependent origination, how this all was recreating itself. And at that point, when he recognized that, there was a moment that all the forces that he had been actually pushing away, you could say the word impurities, the difficulties, which he had actually pushed away for a long, long time, came back. And it's usually they talk about as the personification is Mara, the tempter, and comes back as the 10 armies of Mara, it's called. And they come back, and he then has to go through this kind of symphony of presentations by Mara to say, okay, you've gone far enough. You can't go any farther. This is not okay. And so his psyche suddenly creates this, and at least from my mind, the psyche creates these blocks. And there's, they talk about it as kind of a battle, but I think in more ways that, from what I know, there certainly was the disenchantment of not being lured by both the kind of desire pieces of lust and promise and greatness and all that. So there was the alluring quality, and he didn't fall for it. He just sat. And on the other side was the swords, spears, arrows of aversion and anger, and he didn't fall for that. And then there was the veil, that covers things, which we could call delusion or ignorance. And he doesn't move towards it or away from it. He stays in the center. And as he stays in the center, then at this point, Mara says, you know, what right do you have to sit there and not react to these life forces? You know? And at that point, the classic kind of statue of the Buddha that you see, which actually wasn't Indian, he was actually, in all the statues we see, he's Aryan because somebody from Alexander the Great's army drew the first Buddha. And he puts his right hand down and touches the earth. Yeah. And he said, it'd be like saying Gaia, or the earth is my witness that through my many lives, through my sacrifice over and over again, that I have the right to be whole and to sit here and not have the veil of ignorance or illusion. And at that moment, he actually became a Buddha, one who is fully awake. And that is an example that somehow he didn't get from the sky. He actually had to say, as the earth is my witness. And so it went from a very kind of vertical view of spirituality, that somehow, you know, it was up there, to actually owning what's here. And I think that's one of the great qualities that in kind of world religion the Buddha taught, was that you have to own what you have here. And that the awakening exists in owning completely what's here. You know, that's huge. You know, it's really huge. Now, it's true that there's a practice that's called the 32 parts of the body. And it goes through a series. It would be, Pulasada, I was a monk under him, and he used to talk about it like a car, going through it. And the brakes and the steering wheel and the clutch and the wheels. And he said, is this a car? In the same way that this 32 parts of the body would be that you would go through it and say, is this me? And the whole thing is, yes, the parts are there, but the I is extra. And that's really all we're trying to teach here in some way, that the I is extra, that there is a sense of kind of being in the center of all this. But what is it that happens when we sit in the center of things and fully embody? Not disembody, but fully embody. And fully embody means that basically we are aware of the senses, we're aware of the thinking itself. But the I is extra. You know, there's just, in the seeing, there's the seen. In the hearing, there's just the heard. You know, in the sensing, there's just the sense. In the thinking, there's just the thoughts. You know. So that awakening, that possibility, is based on a wholeness. You know, it's like, as you sit here right now, that you can, part of your watching your breath is an impermanent process that is experienced as part of. It's not something separate from. It is a part of the whole body. Yesterday morning when I spoke of the whole body breathing. That in the subtlety, I'm not sure if it's 206 or 211 bones in the body, whichever it is, it's a bunch of them, that they all actually move. When we are fully sensitive and have the subtleness of being present, we actually get it that this whole thing is being breathed. And it is not one place, but a whole experience is happening. I think one of my first, it took me a long time to get this, by the way, because it wasn't so apparent. Even and I started in some years with the Tibetans first, but there are a couple incidents. One of them was this Lama Thupten Yeshi in Kathmandu, and I sort of was the quintessential long-haired, Jesus-looking hippie who had made it to India, believing somehow that I could transcend what was here. And transcending means that I didn't have to do that life review. That wasn't part of the deal. I was just going to keep going on beyond. And I remember sitting on this hill overlooking Kathmandu, and Yeshi said to me, he said, you have it wrong. You think you have to go out. And then he said, you have to go through this. But I didn't understand what he said by that. It's like one of those things like, this guy's supposed to know something. And what's he talking about? And then later I went and I took a couple months and I walked up to Everest region and stuff. And so I remember Yeshi gave me this mantra. And then he also said, he said, keep your awareness in your feet as you walk. And I walked for 2 months. And I got it. I really got it, finally. That's really what this was about somehow. I was trying to get here. Of course, maybe the psychedelics in the 60s, and this still was the 60s, had discombobulated me quite a bit. So transcendence was easy, but getting here was something else. That was a whole other aspect to the movie that I haven't really gotten yet. But then eventually I start to see that, to free the mind is to be free in all senses. But it's also, it's all about inclusion. So if you separate out in your head, there's something that you're missing. Something that is fundamental about learning that happens in the physical experience. Because actually in the mind you can make up things that are very solid. Ideas, beliefs, wow, they are very solid. But what is that wholeness, that experience of being embodied like? Well, it means that you're touching impermanence all the time. And if you're touching impermanence, then you're actually, this being born and dying is being touched. So that impermanence then becomes something that's breaking into the solidness of the concoction, of the mental construct, of the mental formations. So the practice here It's a slow process, of retraining the mind, which, very young, you almost all, I think all people learn to disembody somehow. That we have to, think up how we're going to act so that we can be loved. It's fundamentally what it is. And so we get really good at thinking up how we're going to be loved. It's not liberation. Interesting, if we had really gotten it very young, then we would have seen that from this aspect that that we were already loved. But that's not the kind of our cultural psychology. We somehow have to relearn this. And it's simply the practice. Oh, feel the breath. Feel your body. Watch what's going on. Know yourself. So you have to study the self. To know the self. To know the self is to let go of the self. That's kind of the progress we did here. I'll read to you a little Suzuki Roshi about breathing. When we practice Zazen meditation, our mind always follows our breathing. When we inhale, the air comes into the inner world. When we exhale, the air goes out to the outer world. We say inner world or outer world, but actually there is just one whole world. In this limitless world, the air comes in and goes out like someone passing through a swinging door. If you think I breathe, the I is extra. There is no you to say I. What we call I is just a swinging door, which moves when we inhale and when we exhale. It just moves. This is all. When your mind is pure and calm, enough to follow this movement, there is no thing, no I, no world, no mind, nor body, just a swinging door. So when we practice Zazen, all that exists is the movement of the breathing. But we are aware of this movement. But to be aware of the movement does not mean to be aware of the small sense of self, but rather of your universal nature or Buddha nature. That's what we're doing. No inside, no outside. No around the side. There's just this being breathed. And you can get caught up in the concocting, which is the little self, or you can rest in the universal self, of the Buddha nature, which says that there's never been any disconnect. You've always been connected. No separation. Therefore, no separateness, no loneliness. patience, endurance. Sitting upright, shivers go from toes to crown of head. Oh my, running down to the highway, thumb pointing away from here, hitchhiking to a place where the discomfort and darkness cannot come. Breath. One moment. Out of nowhere, the last embers of the fire gone out. Sparks. Yes, the fear rises in the flames again, that concoction, giving itself to the unimaginable. Remembering here, returning instantly. Pure longing for freedom, blurred and ragged as it may be, being blind and poor, we find another breath. Learn to wait again and again in that place of dis-ease, waiting in our own sunshine, forgiveness, our own home of belonging. Sitting back up, the empty hallway beneath the breath, where everything broken returns to itself, reassembles, glued from the horse hooves of the beast of burden we are. Fingers unclenched, luminous sky opens, waiting on the rim of time again and again, walking across any darkness, any territory, any high pass, to find that one heart, your heart, enduring, constant, glued together. Precious life, this one life, confirms our courage. We go forth. So let's just sit for a moment. Fingers unclench, luminous sky opens, waiting on the rim of time again and again, walking across any darkness, any territory, any high pass, to find that one heart, your heart, enduring, constant, glued together. Precious life, this one life, confirms our courage. We go forth.